Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pezayin, Daf 87 of Masechta Yevamos, friend. Daf 87 we kind of talk about, like who can eat like Truma and Meiser and that kind of stuff. Then we wrap up the 9th parak of Masechta Yevamos and we get started onto the 10th parak of Masechta Yevamos. So it's cool, we're really moving along here. I mean, another few days we'll just already be up to Tzadi, and then before you know it, we'll be up to Kuf. I feel like Kuf is that's the real turning point over here, because then once we're past the 100 mark, then I feel like the end is in sight. 122 pages, Masechta Yevamos. I think it's the hardest Masechta. At least the first 30 daf I thought was really hard. Alright friends, let's go weiter. So where are we? We're going to start off Pei Vav Amud Beis at the Mishnah, towards the bottom. Bas Yisrael shenises lekoyin. Okay, so if you have a Bas Yisrael and she's married to a koyin, Toich al betrume, she could eat trume, of course, right? Bas Yisrael is married to a koyin, she can eat trume. Meis v'lo yimenu bein. If the koyin dies, but they had a child together, Toich al betrume, she can continue eating trume. Nises a Levi, but now if she gets married to a Levi, well then she can no longer eat Truma, but Toicha b'Meiser, she can eat Meiser now. Meis v'lo yimenu bein. If the Levi now dies, but they had a child together who's a Levi, Toicha b'Meiser, she could continue eating Meiser. Nisis Yisrael, if she then marries a Yisrael, lo tocha lo b'Truma v'lo b'Meiser, she cannot eat Truma or Meiser because she's married to Yisrael now. Meis v'lo yimenu bein. If the Yisrael dies and they had a child together who's a Yisrael, lo tocha lo b'Truma v'lo b'Meiser. Well, she cannot eat Truma or Meiser because her last husband was a Yisrael, and they had a child who's Yisrael, and therefore she cannot eat Truma or Meiser. Meis b'nam Yisrael, but if the child from the Yisrael died, well then tocha b'Meiser, she could still eat Meiser now on account of the child who is a Levi. Meis b'nam Levi, if the child from the Levi dies, tocha b'Truma, she could then eat Truma because she still now has a son who's a kohen. Meis b'nam kohen lo soicha lo b'Truma v'lo b'Meiser. But if that child dies as well, she doesn't have any children anymore, she's a Bas Yisrael, she cannot eat any Truma or Meiser. Bas kohen shenises l'Yisrael. If you have a Bas kohen who marries, right, who when she's in her father's house she's allowed to eat Truma, but now she marries a Yisrael, so lo tocha b'Truma, she can no longer eat Truma. Meis v'lo yimenu bein. If the Yisrael dies and they had a child together who's a Yisrael, lo tocha b'Truma, she cannot eat Truma. Nises leLevi, if she marries a Levi, tocha b'Meiser, she can now eat Meiser. Meis v'lo yimenu bein. If the Levi dies, but they had a child together, tocha b'Meiser, she can continue eating Meiser. Nises leKohen, if she then marries a Kohen, tocha b'Truma, she can eat Truma. Meis v'lo yimenu bein. If the Kohen dies and they had a child together who's a Kohen, tocha b'Truma, she can continue eating Truma. Meis b'nam Kohen, but if the child from the Kohen dies, lo tocha b'Truma, she can no longer eat Truma, but she can continue eating Meiser. Meis b'nam Levi, lo tocha b'Meiser. If the son from the Levi dies, she can no longer eat Meiser. Meis b'nam Yisrael chozeres lebeis avia. Now if the child that she had with the Yisrael dies and she's a Bas Kohen, well then she's no longer married to anybody, she no longer has any children, she goes back to her father's house, and on this the pasuk says, V'shavel b'savia kinurel, that she goes back to her father's house like when she was a na'ara milechem avia tochel, and she can eat from the bread of her father's house, i.e. she can resume eating Truma once again. She goes back home, she doesn't have any children, she can eat Truma once again. Now, it says the Gemara, Meis b'nam Levi tocha b'Truma, that the Mishnah had said that if you have a Bas Yisrael who's married to a Kohen, she can eat Truma, right? If they have a child together and then the husband dies, she can continue eating Truma. If she's now married to a Levi, she can no longer eat Truma, but she can eat Meiser. If they have a child together and then the husband dies, well, she can continue eating Meiser. If that child from the Levi dies, then she can once again eat Truma on account of the fact that she has a child who's a Kohen. Right, so it says the Gemara, Meis bina miLevi tocha b'Truma, that if the child that she had with the Levi husband dies, well then she can go back to eating Truma again because she has a child who's a Kohen. Mishum bina minalan. So how do we know this? That she can go back and continue eating Truma because of her son who's a Kohen. Amr ba'aba, Amr Rav, Bas Uvas. Says Rav in the name of Rav, that the pasuk says in the context of going back to eating truma, uvas koyin kisi almana grusha. So it could have said bas, but it says uvas, the extra vav. So come on, Rabbi Akiva. That sounds like that's Rabbi Akiva. The Darish vave. That Rabbi Akiva learns out things from extra vavs. Afilu temer Rabbana. The Gemara says you can even say it's the rabbis. Kula uvas koyin yiserehu. That entire sort of, when it says uvas koyin, you don't need those two words at all. Because if you look in the Torah, the previous pasuk already said uvas koyin kisiya liish zar, etc. It could have then just continued and said kisiya liish amanu ugrusha if she's a widow or a divorcee. We don't need it to say uvas koyin a second time. That whole uvas koyin thing is extra, and therefore that is what teaches us that if her child from the Levi dies, but she still has a child who's a kohen, she can go back to eating truma. That when she goes back to her father's house, she can go back and eat truma, sure, but she cannot eat the breast and the thigh of korban shlomim, of kochim kalim. Right? That when she was in her father's house initially, she was able to eat whatever they could eat. Right? Truma, chazav ashok. But now, now when she was married and then divorced or widowed, and she goes back home, she can continue. She can go back to eating truma, but not chazav ashok. Rav Chizda, Ravina, Bar Shila, Mikra. Says Rav Chizda, the name of Ravina Bar Shila. Where do we have a pasuk that says this? He b'trumas hakodshim lo sochel. It says that she can eat the trumas hakodshim, b'murim min hakodshim, that which is separated, taken from the animals, i.e. the chazav ashok lo sochel, she cannot eat. Rav Nachman Omer Rabba Bar Avua milechem v'lo kol lechem prat l'chazav ashok. Rav Nachman Omer Rabba Bar Avua says that we learn it out from the fact that it says milechem avias, so milechem, from the bread, i.e. not all of the bread, i.e. she can eat truma but not chazav ashok. Maskef Lomer Ram Bar Chama asks the kasha ema prat la'afaris nedarim, or maybe what it means is that, she can go back to eating the bread, but not everything. Not everything meaning that when she goes back home, her father can no longer nullify her vows. Paska, Tana Dever Bishmal, but says Rava, we already know this from the Tana Dever Bishmal. The Tana Dever Bishmal, V'neder Amanu Ugrusha Yakum Aleh, that a woman, what does it say? V'neder Amanu Ugrusha, right? That if you have a widow or a divorcee, so then there's nobody to annul her vows, to nullify her vows, and therefore whatever she vows is going to take effect. So matam v'lomar v'alo motza michlal av motza michlal bal. Why do I need a pasuk to teach me that the vow will stand? I mean, who's going to nullify it? She's divorced, she's widowed, she doesn't have a husband, she already left her father's house. So la reisha mosar av l'shluchei abal. Well, it's talking about a situation where the father delivered his daughter to the messengers of the husband. Or the messengers of the father delivered this girl to the messengers of the husband. And then on the way, they either got divorced or she became a widow on the way. So do we consider her to still be in her father's house, or to be to have been in her new husband's house? What we learn is that once she leaves her father's house, right? She's delivered to the messengers of the husband, of her future husband, so then he can no longer annul her vows. All right. Rav Safra Omar Milechem Avia Tochel, that Rav Safra says that she can eat from the bread of her father, Lechem B'lo Basar. Yes, she can eat the bread, but not the meat, not the chazav ashok. Rav Papa Omar Milechem Avia Tochel, Lechem HaKonu LaAvia. Right, it says from the bread of her father she can eat. Bread that belongs to her father. Truma is the property of the Kohen. To the exception of the breast and the thigh, that is not the property of the Kohen, that's the property of God, and God, grants it to the Kohanim, but it's not considered theirs, and therefore she doesn't, when it says that she goes back to her father's house, to the things that her father gets, not to the things that are, right, the things that belong to her father, i.e. Truma, not to Chazav Ashok, which is like a gift from God. Rava Amr says, Rava, that breast and the thigh, tochlu ato v'necho v'nosecha itach, you and your sons and your daughters can eat it with you, bisman she'itach, when they are still with you. But once she leaves her house, then she loses that perk, and when she comes back, she cannot continue to eat truma. She cannot continue to eat chazav hashok. Amar Vada bar Ahava, Tana, Ustak she chozeres levesavia, chozeres letruma. That when she goes back to her father's house, she goes back to truma. Ve'eno chozeres lechazav hashok. She does not. She cannot eat chazav hashok. However, b'shvil b'na chozeres af lechazav hashok. However, there's a distinction that when we said in our Mishnah that if you have a Bas Yisrael who's married to a Kohen and they have a child, i.e., she has a son who's a Kohen, and then she gets married to a Levi and they have a child together. So now she has a child who's a Levi. The Levi dies, so she's allowed to continue eating Meiser but not Truma. Then that child from the Levi dies. She then can go back and continue once again to eating Truma because she has a child who's a Kohen. Where Vada bar Ahava is saying that when she goes back to eating Truma on account of the fact that she has a child who's a Kohen, so in that case, in addition to being able to eat truma, she can also eat chazav hashok. So, in a situation where a Bas Kohen is married to somebody else and then, that person dies, or they get divorced and she goes back home to eat truma, that's only truma ben chazav hashok. But if she was like married to a Levi and then, the Levi died and there was a child and the child died, now she goes back to eating truma because she has a son who's a Kohen, so then she can eat truma as well as chazav hashok. Also, Rav Motche, Amr l'shmaita kamid Rav Ashi. Rav Motche then went and told this over before Rav Ashi. Amr me'echa kamisrabya me'uvas. So he said, Rav Motche asked Rav Ashi, he says, I don't understand. How do you learn? Where do you even learn this halacha b'chlal that when the Levi dies and she goes back to eating truma, so then that when the Levi dies, she can go back to eating truma because she has a child who's a son. It's from uvas miadifala mina. But if we're learning it out from basically a Bas Kohen who goes back to her father's house when her husband dies or she gets divorced, well then just like she's only allowed to eat truma but not chazav hashok, I would think that also when the Levi dies and she can go back to eating truma because she has a son who's a Kohen, that would also only be truma ben chazav hashok. So Rav Ashi answers, Hasm ksiva miuta achalo ksiva miuta. Look over there by the Bas Kohen who goes back home. So there's all these different limitations that we gave a whole bunch of different options why it should only be truma and not chazav hashok. But that we don't necessarily have those limitations in the case of a woman who can go back to eating truma on account of her son who's a Kohen. In that case, she would be able to go back to eating truma as well as chazav hashok. So if you have a Bas Kohen and she marries Yisrael, so that she goes back to her father's house. So you have a Bas Kohen. She was married to Yisrael. And when she's married to Yisrael, so of course she's not allowed to eat truma anymore. But when she goes back to her house, it says V'shavel B'savir, that if she gets divorced or if her husband dies, so she goes back to her father's house, Prada Shemeres Yevamos, to the exclusion of if she has to do Yibum, because then she doesn't go back to her father's house, she still has a Zika with the brother. Kinurel, like when she was a Naira, like when she was growing up, Prada Mubaris, to the exclusion of if she is pregnant. If she's pregnant, so that she wasn't pregnant beforehand when she was in her father's house, so therefore also if she's pregnant now, she doesn't revert to eating truma. Valo dinu. But one second, how come I need the pasuk? How come I need kinurel to exclude if she's pregnant? Valo dinu. I can learn that logically. What's the logic? So now we're going to get into a whole bunch of these kal v'chomer. You ready? Hold on. What's the phrase? Hold on to your seats. Is that a phrase? If it's not, then we'll coin the term. This is big, friends. We're going to coin a new term. Hold on to your seats. It might have already been coined though. Dennis, has hold on to your seats already been coined? Volod min harishin ki volod min hasheni lefotr min hayibum. Also ubur ki yilud. Woo! Friends, did you get that? That b'makom shelo yosef volod min harishin ki volod min hasheni. Meaning, if you have and Sarah was married to some guy, and they had a baby together, and then the guy died. So she doesn't have to do Yibum, right? There's a baby. Now she gets remarried to some other guy, and that guy dies, and they don't have a baby. So we gotta keep that guy's name going. There's no baby to keep his name going. So now she's got it. So even though she already has a baby from a previous marriage, that is not going to make her potter from Yibum. She's still gonna have to do Yibum in order to keep the second husband's name going. So now, right, so to read that again, that we don't treat the child from the first marriage as though the child is also from the second marriage, to say that, well, there's a baby, you don't do Yibum. We don't say that, and she does have to do Yibum. And nonetheless, also uber kiyulud, we treat. I keep on getting nervous that somebody's going to walk in the door and distract me. Also uber kiyulud, we make the uber the right by Yibum, we treat a pregnancy as if the baby is born, right? That if she is pregnant, right? If Reuven's married to Sarah and Reuven dies and Sarah is pregnant, so she doesn't do Yibum. So even though Yibum is more stringent in that she has to do Yibum even if she already has a baby from a previous marriage, and yet we say, but if she is pregnant, she doesn't have to do Yibum. Mokum she'also volod min harishin kivolod min hasheni lefoslim min atrume. But in a situation where, let's say, you have a bas kohen who is married to a Yisrael, and they have a baby, and then the husband dies, and then she gets remarried, and then that guy dies, and we say, well, she can't go back to eating truma because she has a baby from the first husband, and therefore she has a baby from Yisrael, she can't go back to eating truma. So over here we're saying that the fact that she has a baby from the first husband is relevant. Einudin shenaisa uber kilud. Well, then certainly we'll be stringent there and say that we'll treat the uber like, right? Meaning if we're treating the child from the first marriage as if that he's relevant in this case, so then certainly let's say this. In the first case by Yibum, where the child from the first marriage is irrelevant, and yet we treat the pregnancy as significant, well then certainly where the child from the first marriage is relevant, to say that she's not allowed to eat truma because there's a child from the Yisrael, well then certainly in that case, the pregnancy will be relevant as well. And she would not go back to eating truma. So then, why do I even need the pasuk to teach me that if she's pregnant, she doesn't go back to eating truma? I can learn enough from Makal v'chomer. So enu din shnaise uber kiyulud. So certainly I should make an uber like a yulud. Lo, the Gemara says no. Mali also uber kiyulud linyan yibum. I can make the argument that look, by yibum we treat a pregnancy as if the baby was born, to say that she doesn't have to do yibum. Shari also mesim kechayim, because when it comes to yibum, we also make the dead like they're alive. Whew, that sounds spooky. We make the dead like they're alive. Whew, that's some serious stuff. What does that mean? It means that, well, what happens in a situation where Reuven is married to Sarah and they have a baby? Mazel tov. Reuven goes to Wellwood. Now Sarah doesn't need to do yibum because there's the baby. She then goes and gets married to some other fellow. The baby dies. So now effectively Reuven doesn't have any offspring. So on the one hand, I would think that she needs to go back and do Yibum, or at least do Chalitza, because Reuven doesn't have anybody to carry on his name. Yet we don't say that. We treat the baby as if he's alive, as if Reuven has offspring, and Sarah doesn't need to do Chalitza or anything like that. So when it comes to Yibum, we treat the dead like they're alive, i.e. if this child, meaning if at the time that Reuven died there was a child, even if the child later dies, we treat him as if he's alive, to the extent that she doesn't need to do Yibum or Chalitza or anything like that. So, right, so again, Mali also uber ki yilud le'inyan yibum. Yeah, we make a pregnancy like as if though he's born by yibum. Shall we also mesim kechayim? Also by yibum, we make the dead like they're alive. Nice uber ki yilud le'inyan trume. Would we make a pregnancy like as though he was born with regard to trume? She lo also mesim kechayim, where we don't treat the dead like they're alive, meaning if you have a bas kohen and she's married to a Yisrael, and then the guy dies, the Yisrael, and they have a baby, of course, right? Bas kohen is married to Yisrael, they have a baby, and then the fellow goes to Wellwood, the husband goes to Wellwood, so she's not allowed to eat truma. But if the baby now dies, she can go back to eating truma. We don't treat that baby who's dead as though he's alive to prevent her from eating truma. Rather, we make shelo so mesim chaim. We don't treat the dead as if they're alive. So maybe over there, I would say that by truma, we do not treat a uber kiyilud. So Talmud Lomar kinurea pradlimu beres. That is why we need to have the pasuk to teach kinurel to say that if she's pregnant, then she does not get to eat truma. Alright, what do we tell you? We have to teach both the situation of when she's pregnant as well as the situation as when she doesn't have, right, to say that, that she only can go back to eating truma if she doesn't have any children, but if she has children, she cannot go back to eating truma if her husband dies. Because if we would only have the pasuk of, well, if she doesn't have children, she can go back to eating truma, but if she has children, then she cannot. Maybe that's because, look, initially when she was by her father's house growing up, it was just her. But now it's her and a child, so therefore she cannot go back to eating truma. But I might think, look, when she was growing up, it was just her. Now also, it's the same body, it's just one body, there aren't two separate bodies. So therefore, maybe I would think that if she's pregnant, she can go back to eat truma. So therefore, I have to teach her, no, if she's pregnant, she cannot go back to eating truma when she goes back to her father's house after her husband dies. Tzricha, fine. Because of Rachmane Muberes, and if we would only have the case of when she's pregnant, to make her gufa srika vashta gufa maya, I'll say, look, when she's pregnant, she cannot go back to eating truma, because initially when she was growing up, she didn't have, she wasn't filled up with a baby. But now she's filled up with a baby. But I might think that when, with regard to children, to make her gufa srika vashta gufa srika emalo tzricha, that by children I may have thought to say, look, well, when she was growing up, she had an empty, she was empty inside, and now when she has children, sure, she has children, but she's not pregnant. She's also empty inside. So therefore, I might think that when she goes back home, if her husband dies, so then she'll be able to eat truma. Kamash malon. So tzricha, therefore, we have to teach that both if she has children or if she's pregnant, she may not go back to her father's house to eat truma. Now, the next 3 lines of the Gemara, I don't know, we're just giving like random mnemonics. You ready? Okay, here we go. Simen amale lo naisa maisa b'misa naisa velo naisa b'volod yovam u'shuma yibum u'shuma simen. Moving on. Omer le reviewed midaskarta l'rov. Now reviewed midaskarta says to Rav. Now, interesting. Okay, we're going to do like a whole bunch of these like kal v'chomers now. So, just, you friends, you ready for kal v'chomers? Good, let's go weiter. So, lo naisa mesim kichayim linyan yibum. Let's say that the dead is not like they are alive with regard to yibum from kal v'chomer. Right? We had said that the dead are like they are alive, meaning if Ruvain dies and Sarah has a baby, so she doesn't have to do yibum. If the baby then later dies, we treat the baby as though he was alive, i.e. that she still doesn't need to do yibum or chalitza. But Rava suggests, lo naisa mesim kichayim, let's not treat the dead like they are alive, le'inyon yibum mikal v'chomer. Ma'b'makom sh'asa volod min harishin kevolod min hasheni. If by truma, where we say that the child that the bas kohen had with the Yisrael, we treat, right? So then, if she then marries another fellow and he dies, we say, well, she still has this child. So we treat this child as significant. Lefosim and Truma, to say that she's not letting Truma because she had a baby with this Yisrael. And yet we do not treat the dead like they're alive, right? If this kid dies, then she can go back home and eat Truma. Well, then in a case where we do not make the volod from the Rishon like the volod min hasheni, the focher miyibum, to say that she's potter from yibum, well then certainly then we should not treat the dead like they are alive. Well, that's why the pasuk says in Mishlei, right? Of course, that the ways of the Torah are pleasant and all of its paths are peace. Meaning, what are we trying to argue over here? Well, let's try to argue that by Yibum, right, we say that by Yibum, if Reuven is married to Sarah, they have a baby, Reuven goes to Wellwood, well, there's a baby, so she doesn't have to do Yibum or Chalitza, and then she gets married to somebody else. Now, we're saying that if this baby now dies, so effectively Reuven doesn't have any offspring, we're saying that we treat the baby as if he's still alive to the extent that she doesn't need to do Chalitza, essentially. Now, we just wanted to argue that maybe we would treat the dead baby as a dead baby and not a live baby. And if that's the case, then Reuven doesn't have anybody to carry on his name. Maybe she would have to do, Yibum, but she got remarried, so she wouldn't be doing Yibum. She would do Chalitza at least. But we say, but that wouldn't be very nice. That would be kind of awkward and make like the relationship with her husband kind of weird. Like they're married, but she has to do like Chalitza. It gets weird. So we say that the ways of the Torah are pleasant and all of its paths are peace, i.e., we'll treat the dead child as if he's still alive, to say that she does not need to do Chalitza anymore. Alright, fine. V'naisa mesim k'chaim. Alright, I just heard the gate open. Let's see. Uh-oh. Do I hear a key going in the door? Not yet. I'm listening, I might though. Not yet. Okay. We might be in the clear. Oof, that was intense. V'naisa mesim k'chaim linyan Truma. But let's say that with regard to Truma, let's make the dead like they're alive, right? We said that by Truma, if she has a baby, so then she's not allowed to eat Truma, right? Meaning a bas kohen who's married to Yisrael and they have a baby, and then the husband dies, she cannot go back to eating Truma because she has a baby. But if the baby dies, the baby's dead, she can go back to her house and eat Truma. So v'naisa mesim k'chaim, but why don't we treat the dead child as though he's alive, linyan Truma, with regard to Truma mikal v'chomer, from logic. In a place where we do not treat the volod from the Rishon like the volod from the Sheni, the focher min Yibum, to say that she is potter from Yibum, right? Meaning, even though she had a child, when it comes to Yibum, even though she had a child from the first husband, she still has to do Yibum. And nonetheless, also Mesim Kechaim, we treat Mesim Kechaim, the dead like they're alive. Malkum shall also volod min Rishon kevolod min Hasheni. So when it comes to the fostum min Truma, when it comes to Truma, where we treat the child from the first husband like a child from the second husband, i.e., to say that even when the second husband dies, she still cannot go back to eating Truma because she has this child. Certainly, then I would think that if the child dies, so we would treat him like he's alive, just like by Yibum. He says, look, the pasuk says that if she doesn't have any children, she can go back and eat Truma. She doesn't have any children, the child died. Let's say that when it comes to Yibum, the child from the first marriage should be like the child from the second marriage, i.e., to say that she doesn't have to do Yibum. If by Truma we do not make the dead like they're alive, nonetheless, also volod min harishin kivolod min hasheni, we treat the child from the first husband like the child from the second husband, i.e., if the second husband dies, she still has that child and she cannot go back to eating Truma. Well, if by Yibum, where we treat the dead like they're alive, certainly we should treat the child from the first husband like the child from the second husband. We say that look, it says that by Yibum that if he doesn't have any children, so you have to do Yibum. So here, if he doesn't have any children, what do you want me to tell you? Even though she has a child from the first marriage, but then she got remarried, this fellow doesn't have any offspring, so you have to do Yibum. What do you want me to tell you? Let's say that by Truma we would not treat the child from the first marriage like the child from the second marriage. If in a place where we treat the dead like they are alive, to say that she doesn't need to do Yibum, and yet we do not treat the child from the first husband like the child from the second husband, if by Truma where we do not treat the dead like they are alive, and certainly then we should make the child from the first one like the child from the second one. That we should not make the child from the first one like the child from the second one. We say, yeah, but you can only go back to eating truma if you don't have any kids. But here you have a kid, so you can't go back to eating truma. Basically, there was a lot of kal v'chomers. It was pretty confusing. You probably should do it slower if you want. Well, that was like basically we wrapped up the 9th parak of Masechta Yevamos. I think we'll hold it here and pick up from the new parak tomorrow. But all right, that was a interesting daf. We talked about like being able to eat truma with like kids and Kohanim and Levim and Yisraelim and stuff like that. Peace out.